Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm John Tucker. Here are the stories we're following today.
We begin with the latest on a celebration that turned into chaos in Kansas City. At least one person is dead, more than 20 others wounded in a mass shooting that followed the Kansas City Chiefs' Super Bowl victory parade. Authorities say at least 8 of the victims are children. 3 suspects are in custody. Kansas City Mayor Quinton Lucas says the city's celebration should not have ended this way.
This is a day that a lot of people look forward to, something they remember for a lifetime. And what they shouldn't have to remember is the threat of gun violence.
And Mayor Quinton Lucas says the White House and federal agencies have offered assistance. President Biden put out a statement reiterating his call for an assault weapons ban.
And turning now to politics here in the U.S., we're learning that former President Donald Trump considering major changes to America's commitment to NATO if he returns to office. Details from Bloomberg's Ed Baxter.
Trump says scaled back commitments to NATO nations with a 2-tiered NATO alliance where Article 5, which requires common defense of any member under attack, would apply only to those that hit defense spending goals, others not defended. His advisors say no plans have been finalized. Trump also says he wants to push Ukraine to settle the war as a condition to getting any more aid. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
Okay, Ed, thank you. Russian President Vladimir Putin's weighing in on the U.S. presidential race for the first time. In an interview with state television, the Russian leader was asked who would be the better U.S. president for Russia, Joe Biden or Donald Trump. Here's Putin's answer through an interpreter.
Biden. He is the more experienced person. He is predictable. He is a politician of the old formation. But we will work with any U.S. leader who the American people have confidence in.
Back in 2016, Vladimir Putin praised the other frontrunner, Donald Trump.
And now let's turn to the Middle East. Gaza's health ministry says Israel has stormed the main hospital in southern Gaza. This comes a day after Israel's army warned the thousands who'd sought shelter at the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis to evacuate. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has backed out of ceasefire talks in Cairo. He's calling Hamas's demand for a total Israeli withdrawal from Gaza delusional. Allies, including the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, are calling for restraint.
The threats to more action on Rafah has everyone deeply worried. We need to see stabilization in the region, peace, and we need to work on the two-state solution. That is the only way to ensure durable peace and safety.
Despite Prime Minister Trudeau's comments, Israel's position suggests that even a temporary pause in the fighting remains a distant prospect.
John, let's turn now to space. A privately owned moon lander is on its way to the lunar surface.
3, 2, 1, ignition, and liftoff. Go SpaceX, go IM-1 and the Odysseus lunar lander.
The IM-1 flight is carrying 6 NASA payloads of instruments designed to gather data about the lunar environment. The latest in SpaceX's Intuitive Machines mission is ahead of the agency's planned return of astronauts to the moon later this decade.
And turning to the markets, stock futures higher after the S&P 500 closed at 5,000 yesterday. It was a big tech once again leading the way. Now, we found out tech was a big theme for hedge fund managers in the latest 13F filings. Let's get more from Bloomberg's Doug Krisner.
Hedge funds seem to be chasing the rally in information technology, fueled by the growth in artificial intelligence. The latest quarterly reports filed with the SEC show institutional buying of Amazon, Intel, and NVIDIA in Q4. Meta Platforms was an outlier, with a net sale from hedge funds worth $6.6 million in stock. It suggests these investors may have locked in profits after Meta jumped 18% in the final quarter of 23. Technology accounted for the biggest weightings in hedge fund portfolios at 25%. Consumer discretionary was next at 15%. In New York, I'm Doug Krisner, Bloomberg Radio.
Doug, thanks. In company news, shares of Cisco are down more than 5%. The largest maker of networking equipment slashed its full-year forecast and also said it would cut about 5% of its global workforce. That's about 4,000 jobs.
And we're also getting job cuts in the financial industry. Sources say Morgan Stanley planning to eliminate several hundred jobs. Those cuts will affect less than 1% of employees in the wealth management business, which has about 40,000 workers.
Turning to the economy, another Fed officials urging patience when it comes to cutting interest rates. Federal Reserve Vice Chair for Supervision Michael Barr says he agrees with Chairman Jay Powell's cautious approach.
I fully support what he called a careful approach to considering policy normalization given current conditions. January's report on consumer product index inflation is a reminder that the path back to 2% inflation may be a bumpy one.
The Fed's Michael Barr also repeated his longstanding view that the U.S. banking sector is sound.
In Europe, the UK slipped into a mild recession in the second half of 2023. Gross domestic product fell 0.3% in the fourth quarter. Well, that follows an unrevised 0.1% decline in the previous 3 months.
And Japan's economy also unexpectedly slipped into recession after shrinking for a second quarter due to anemic domestic demand. GDP contracted at an annualized pace of 0.4% in the final 3 months of last year, following a revised 3.3% retreat for Japan's economy in the previous quarter. Time now to take a look at some of the other stories making news around the world with Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Nathan. Republican chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Mike Turner, is publicly warning of a national security threat concerning a destabilizing foreign military capability so serious that he says President Biden should declassify all information about it. It's reported the intelligence relates to Russia wanting to put nuclear weapons into space to possibly use against satellites. House Speaker Mike Johnson says he's aware of the issue and wants the public to stay calm.
I saw Chairman Turner's statement on the issue, and I want to assure the American people there is no need for public alarm. We are going to work together to address this matter.
Speaker Johnson says he will press the Biden administration to take appropriate action. The White House is urging House Republicans to agree to a foreign aid package already passed by the Senate. The $95 billion bill would fund Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan. But House Speaker Mike Johnson has said that he won't bring the bill to the floor. Johnson wants foreign aid to be tied to border security, but the Senate proposed a bipartisan plan earlier this month that Speaker Johnson refused to put to a vote. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre says that Johnson is stonewalling congressional progress and listened to former President Trump, who pressured Republicans to kill the bipartisan deal.
What is it? He decides to choose Donald Trump. And let's not forget, there's fentanyl traffickers, right? That's what he sided with over the Border Patrol, over this president, and doing what majority of Americans wants us to do. He's the one killing this.
Speaker Johnson says he wants to meet with President Biden, but the White House says that there's nothing to negotiate because the bipartisan Senate deal contained much of what Republicans have been asking for related to border security. Donald Trump is expected to be back in the New York court today for a hearing that could decide whether the former president's first criminal trial begins in late March. Trump pleaded not guilty last April to 34 counts of falsifying business records. Prosecutors say Trump's company kept fraudulent records as part of a scheme to bury stories about extramarital affairs that the former president says were false. Trump's lawyers say the criminal case is politically motivated. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg Nathan.
Okay, Michael, thank you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update, brought to you by Tri-State Audi. Here's John Stashower.
All right, Nathan. The Knicks right now have more injured players than healthy ones. Jalen Brunson did play in Orlando, but 6 of the Knicks' top players did not. And sure enough, they lost to the Magic 118-100. Brunson scored 33 in defeat. He's now headed to Indianapolis to play in Sunday's All-Star game. It's a good time for the All-Star break as the Knicks hope to at least get some of these injured players healthy. They've lost 4 in a row, 5 of 6 since that 9-game winning streak. The Nets lost in Boston by 50, 136-86. It's the second worst loss in Nets history. It's the Celtics' second win this season by 50 or more. Only 2 other teams have ever done that in NBA history. Before the game between Detroit and Phoenix, a fight in the tunnel, and apparently one-sided one with the Pistons' Isaiah Stewart punching the Suns' Drew Eubanks in the face. Police broke it up and they arrested Stewart. He was cited and released. College hoops, number 1 UConn won by 36 at DePaul. Also in the Big East, Seton Hall beat Xavier. Fordham lost to St. Bonaventure. Ohio State fired coach Chris Holtmann. He's in his 7th season, has 4 years left on his contract. Assistant Jake Diebler takes over. The Buckeyes 14-11, 4-10 in the Big Ten. Also getting fired, 49ers defensive coordinator Steve Wilkes. PGA Tours at Riviera in L.A. for Tiger Woods, his first appearance at a sanctioned PGA event in almost a year. He's got high hopes.
A nice W would be nice, right? I haven't ever won this event. So I've played this event since '92, and the years I've played, I've still never have won this event. So hopefully that I can figure something out and get myself in there in contention, and maybe get a W at the end of the week.
Tiger tees off today, 12:25 Eastern. John Stash Hour, Bloomberg Sports.
From coast to coast, from New York to San Francisco, Boston to Washington, D.C., nationwide on SiriusXM, the Bloomberg Business app, and Bloomberg.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. We are coming up to 2 years since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and as the U.S. gets closer to a presidential election, America's commitment to its traditional allies is becoming more of an issue. Bloomberg News has learned former President Donald Trump is considering dramatic changes to the U.S. stance on NATO if he were to return to the White House. And here with us now to discuss it is Bloomberg News senior editor Bill Ferries. Bill, we know the former president has been critical of NATO in the past, to put it mildly, but from what we're hearing, the changes he's contemplating are pretty dramatic.
That's right, Nathan. Thanks. It sounds like what former President Trump has in mind if he's back in the White House is some kind of two-tiered NATO, where the Article 5 commitment, and that's the one that basically says if you're attacked, we will all come to defend you. That would only apply to countries that are meeting the 2% of GDP. 2% of spending of GDP on defense threshold. That's kind of long been the marker for NATO. It's not a requirement. It's not put into the NATO charter or anything like that. But what President Trump, former President Trump, seems to be proposing is if you're below that threshold and you get attacked, then we may not come to your defense.
Well, and we've also seen a lot more attention, not to interrupt, Bill, but on the commitments that NATO members have been making at this point. At least a majority of NATO nations are meeting that 2% threshold, aren't they?
They are. It's when President Trump took office, NATO members were already starting to ramp up spending. That started in about 2014, 2015, after Russia's invasion of Crimea. That continued through the Trump presidency. It was, as you mentioned, a frequent focus of his speeches about NATO. We're at like about 2/3, I think 18 or so of the roughly 31 members are spending at least 2% of GDP on defense. Now, it's important to remember NATO's not like a bank account that they're all depositing money in. This is literally what they are spending. How you define defense includes, salaries and healthcare benefits as well as weaponry. So how that breaks out within every country is going to be different. But you're at about 2/3 of the 31 members at this point.
What's the reaction among NATO members or among NATO itself to this kind of contemplation from the former president? How seriously are they taking this?
Well, I think it's drawing a lot of concern if he gets in the White House that maybe the NATO alliance as we know it will basically start to fall apart. I think the Article 5 commitment is kind of seen as the core of NATO. It's only been invoked once in the organization's history. That was by the United States after September 11th. But it's really seen as the reason there is a NATO. It's the alliance that provides the bulwark against a resurgent Russia. And so I think a lot of countries look and start to wonder, if you're a Baltic state and even if you're making your 2% or more of spending on defense, would the U.S. be there to defend Latvia or Lithuania? That's something that former President Trump has mocked in the past, the idea that U.S. troops would go to defend those states. So I think across the alliance, it's going to generate a lot of alarm.
And as we're reporting these contemplations by the former president, really interesting to hear Russian President Vladimir Putin being asked about the U.S. presidential race and who he would consider a better president for Russia, Joe Biden or Donald Trump. And he's saying Biden. What's your takeaway from that?
Yeah, it's going to be very hard for me to try to get into Vladimir Putin's head. All I know is, what he did say. He said he views Biden as more experienced and predictable. More traditional type politician. He was very much talking positively about Trump in the 2016 campaign. But I don't think the Trump presidency necessarily worked out in the way that maybe Vladimir Putin may have hoped for him. But it's it's what he said. I'd hate to speculate as to what his motives are.
In the meantime, our last 30 seconds here, we also heard former President Trump out on the campaign trail saying that he would make further Ukraine aid alone if he were to come back to the White House as well. What's some of the reaction to that?
Well, it's this is talking about that $60 billion in aid that's kind of stalled right now in the House. He's saying basically, maybe this should be some kind of a loan that they don't have to pay back if they lose the war, and then they can pay back if they win. I don't think that's going to help move the debate over this aid in either direction at this point.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, SiriusXM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm John Tucker. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.